"Excuse me, may I clean the bench when you're finished?" A cruel smile spread across Blaine Prescott's face. Look what wandered in from the service hallway. A black cleaner who thinks she belongs near the piano. Amara Whitfield held his gaze. "Please don't speak to me that way. Did I give you permission to speak? People like you are supposed to wait quietly." She tightened her grip on the trolley handle. "Is that what they taught you downstairs?" "Pathetic," Travis sneered, placing a $100 bill on the piano lid. "Bet she can't hit 5 clean notes. Easy money." Blaine's voice was full of delight. He folded a Chopin etude into a paper airplane and tossed it at her boots. "Play something. 5 clean notes win you the $100, miss, and you mop my dorm floor till graduation." Rich students laughed. They laughed because they had no idea who they had just challenged. To understand what happened next, you have to return to the beginning of Amara Whitfield's shift. Wexford Conservatory of Music had stood at the corner of Huntington Avenue and Massachusetts Avenue for 130 years. It rose 5 floors in red brick, with tall windows shaped like the back of a violin, the kind of building people lowered their voices inside without knowing why. One quiet evening, the hallways were nearly silent. Somewhere upstairs, a cellist worked through Bach's Prelude from the first suite, one bar at a time. The air smelled like lemon floor polish and old wood. The floors were the originals. So were some of the pianos. Amara Whitfield walked into the staff break room wearing a navy uniform. She pulled her hair back tight with a plastic band. She tied her sneakers. She slid headphones around her neck without turning them on. Her hands were a contradiction. Short nails, cracked at the cuticles from years of bleach and floor polish. A pale callus at the base of the right thumb where the cleaning rag pressed. But the middle joints of her ring fingers and pinkies stayed supple. The way a pianist's fingers stay supple, no matter what else the hands were made to do. She liked the building best when it was empty. Her shift ran from evening until deep into the night, 4 nights a week. She had been doing it for almost 3 years. The work was the same most nights. She wiped down music stands in the rehearsal rooms. She emptied bins backstage. She picked up reed shavings the clarinet students left in piles on the chairs. She polished the piano lids so the next morning students could see themselves in the lacquer. She had a system. Top floor first, then down. Practice rooms before performance halls. Alden Hall last, because Alden Hall took the longest. She moved through the building like weather. Students passed her without seeing her. Faculty nodded the small nod people give to anyone holding a mop. The older custodians, the ones who had been there 20 years, called her sweetheart and meant it. But mostly, she was furniture. She had learned to be furniture. It was easier than the alternative. Once, this building had known her differently. She had been 14 the first time she walked through the front doors, a scholarship kid from Roxbury, hauling a duffel bag and a folder of recordings her mother had stayed up nights to dub from cassette. Lenora Whitfield had taught piano in the front room of their apartment for $30 an hour. She had given her daughter every lesson Lenora herself had never received. At 15, Amara became the youngest recipient of the conservatory's Junior Chopin Medal. Her photograph went on the wall outside Maestro Beaumont's office. It was still there. She walked past it each week when she vacuumed the second-floor hallway. At 16, Lenora was diagnosed with early-onset amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. The doctors gave her 3 years. She had 2. There had been one last good day before the disease took her mother's hands. One autumn day, months after the diagnosis, Lenora had asked her daughter to play the ballade, the G minor, the first one. The piece most pianists waited a decade to even attempt. Amara had been 16 and angry and afraid, and she had played it badly. Her mother had cried anyway. "The music doesn't care who's listening, baby," Lenora had told her. It never did. That was the last piece Lenora ever heard her daughter play. Amara withdrew from Wexford the following month. She did not write a letter. She did not say goodbye to anyone. She turned in her practice room key at the front desk and walked out through the same doors she'd walked through at 14. Lenora died one quiet morning with her daughter's hand on her hand and the radio playing softly in the kitchen. Amara was 18. What happens to a 16-year-old prodigy who walks away from her gift? She got a job, 2 jobs. She finished high school at the public library in the evenings while her Aunt Maribel sat with Lenora during the day. She enrolled in community college because community college was affordable and a private music school was not. She studied accounting because numbers did not require her to feel anything. When Maribel had a stroke 18 months ago, Amara moved into the back bedroom of the Dorchester apartment to take care of her. Maribel was 68. She used a walker now. She needed help with bathing 3 days a week. Professional home care cost $200 each visit. The only job within a manageable subway ride that paid enough was the night shift at Wexford Conservatory. So Amara came back. She wore the Navy uniform. She emptied the bins. She walked past her own photograph each week and did not look at it. Maribel did not know Amara worked at the conservatory. Amara had told her it was a hospital. She did not have it in her to explain why she had come back here of all places after everything. Some kinds of grief do not survive explaining. She had written letters to 12 local music schools in the past 8 months, asking about teaching openings, beginner students, weekend hours, anything. She had not received a single reply. But on certain quiet nights, after the last student left and the last door closed, Amara Whitfield did something she had told no one about. What do you think a former prodigy does alone in a concert hall long after midnight? She turned on a single work light above the Steinway in Alden Hall. She sat down at the bench. She placed her hands on the keys. For the first 8 bars, her hands shook. They always did. By the 9th bar, they did not. On most quiet nights, she played Bach. Bach was clean. Bach did not ask her to feel. The mathematics of a fugue did not require her to remember her mother's last good day, or the smell of the hospital room, or the specific shape of her own grief. On some nights, when the building was quieter than usual, she played Chopin, but only the nocturnes, never the ballade. She played until nearly an hour had passed. No metronome, no sheet music, no audience. The lacquer of the piano lid caught her reflection, a black woman in a navy uniform, eyes closed, mouth slightly open the way her mother's used to when she was teaching. She owned no piano. The Steinway in Alden Hall was the only one she touched. A security guard named Earl Simmons discovered her playing several months after she returned. He was 72. He had been at Wexford for 40 years. His wife had played the church organ in Mattapan for almost as long. He had stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he had quietly turned around and walked away. He had never mentioned it. He never returned on those nights. It was the only kindness anyone at Wexford had ever shown her. She pulled on her gloves. She gripped the cart handle. She started walking toward Alden Hall. Across the building, on the 3rd floor, Blaine Prescott was having a very bad day. He was 22 and stood 6 feet 1 inch tall, pale and thin-wristed, with the kind of jawline you only got from generations of being told you had a good one. He wore a charcoal cashmere blazer that cost more than Amara's monthly rent. His watch had been his grandfather's. Everything about him said old money, except the way he kept tapping his fingers against his thigh, which said scared. His full name was Blaine Sterling Prescott. The Prescott part was on a brass plaque outside the east wing of the conservatory. The wing had been donated by his father, Sterling Prescott Sr., almost a decade ago. The conservatory had renamed it in gratitude. Blaine had never let anyone forget it. He had also developed certain habits the conservatory had decided not to formally address. He spoke past the cafeteria workers as if they were ventilation. He had once, in front of 3 witnesses, told an older custodian to hurry with the cleaning bucket so the actual people could rehearse. She had been at Wexford longer than he had been alive. Nobody had reported him. The plaque outside the East Wing made certain conversations impossible. He was, by any measurable metric, an excellent pianist. He had been a national finalist twice and ranked at the top of his class for 3 years. He had hands that could move across the keyboard with the precision of a clockmaker. His teachers used the word remarkable in their evaluations. They also used other words in private. A faculty review from his junior year had ended up on the 2nd floor bulletin board by mistake. It read, "Mr. Prescott's playing is flawless and forgettable. He plays every note. He says nothing." Blaine had torn the page down before lunch the next day, shredded it in the practice room, smiled at anyone who asked. but he had memorized the sentence. He repeated it in his head when he could not sleep. He had not been sleeping well for several weeks. Not long before, Blaine had flown to Dallas for the Van Cliburn Regional Semi-Final. He had placed fourth. Fourth was acceptable for most pianists. Fourth was a disaster for a Prescott. The judge's written feedback had been delivered in a sealed envelope. His father had opened it before he did. Sterling had read it once, then handed it across the breakfast table without a word. His father had not spoken to him for the rest of breakfast. He had gone into his study. He had closed the door. The closed door of Sterling Prescott's study was the loudest sound in the Prescott house. There were 3 comments. The first 2 were technical. The third was the one Blaine would still be carrying weeks later. What does a man raised to believe his name guarantees greatness? Here, when someone finally tells him his music is empty, notes are exact, music is absent. Blaine had read that line every morning since. He had read it on the plane home. He had read it in the studio. He had read it deep into the night while pretending to practice. It had begun to sound in his head like his father's voice. Years earlier, when Blaine was a sophomore, Maestro Silas Beaumont had pulled him aside after a master class. Beaumont was 62 and gentler than his reputation suggested. He had listened to Blaine play a Schubert impromptu and said, with no malice at all, "You play every note correctly, Mr. Prescott. None of them mean anything yet." It had been the kindest version of the same sentence Blaine would hear for the next 3 years. He had spent every recital since trying to prove the old man wrong. He still had not done it. That afternoon, in the rehearsal room, Blaine had been working through the lyrical middle section of a Chopin nocturne. His instructor had stopped him on the 4th measure. "Blaine, you're playing the notes." Blaine had nodded, started again. Same correction. "Find the woman inside the music." He had not understood what she meant. He had hated not understanding. He had walked out at the end of the hour without saying goodbye. Travis Langley, Weston Clark, and Camille Pembroke had been waiting for him in the hallway. Travis was a theory major in Alan Edmonds' shoes. Weston was a cellist who wore his father's Patek to class. Camille was a soprano who placed her expensive handbag on any chair she wanted, as if daring someone to move it. They were the kind of friends who laughed at the right jokes at the right time. They never asked Blaine why he stopped speaking sometimes mid-sentence. The 4 of them had ended up in Alden Hall after the recital schedule cleared. They'd been talking half loud, half bored, when a navy uniform pushed a cart through the side door. Blaine looked up. He had been waiting all day to feel superior to someone. The janitor would do. Amara wheeled her cart through the side door of Alden Hall later that evening. She had cleaned this room more than 200 times. She knew the angle of every floorboard. She had not expected anyone to still be in it at this hour. The 4 students looked up. She kept her eyes on the cart. She rolled it toward the stage edge. She prepared a fresh cloth. "Excuse me," she said. "May I clean the bench when you're finished?" Blaine did not look up. He snapped his fingers once. "Wait, we're not done." The other 3 glanced at each other. He did not finish anything. He had nothing to finish. He simply let her stand there holding a scrub brush, while an uncomfortable silence stretched through the empty hall. He examined his cuticles. He smoothed an invisible wrinkle from his blazer. Travis hid a smile behind his hand. By the time he finally looked at her, her shoulders had not moved. Her cart had not moved. She had simply gone still. Blaine finally said, looking past her. "They let the help in this early. It smells like lemon cleaner in here." Amara held his gaze. "It's my shift, sir." Camille stood up. She'd been sitting on the edge of the stage. Now she walked a slow circle around the cart, holding up her phone, recording. "Guys, look at this," she said. "It's like a National Geographic moment. The black janitor and the place people like us expect her to stay. Note the noble dignity of the cleaning rag." Weston laughed. Travis leaned forward to see the framing. Blaine did not look. He did not need to. Amara wiped the corner of the stage. She did not lift her face. Weston pulled a $5 bill out of his wallet, crumpled it, tossed it onto her cart where it landed between the spray bottle and a roll of paper towels. "For the show," he said. "Always tip your service workers, people. It's basic manners." He looked very pleased with himself. Amara did not pick the bill up. She continued wiping. Two students at the back of the hall who had been talking quietly stopped talking. One of them, a young woman with a violin case at her feet, looked at the floor. She did not look at her friends. She did not look at Amara. She just looked at the floor. Long afterward, that student would still remember the smell of lemon cleaner whenever she thought about her own silence. That was Blaine's cue. He set his cup down. He stood. He walked toward her, slow, hands in pockets, the way a man walks through a museum he already owns. "Did I say you could speak?" His voice stayed low. "The help waits. The help doesn't move until I tell it to. Didn't anyone teach you that the help waits until real students are finished?" She gripped her cart handle. Her knuckles paled. He stopped only 6 inches from her. He looked her up and down. Then he reached out. He took the end of her braided ponytail between his thumb and forefinger. He lifted it like a museum docent inspecting a coat. "Is this even real?" Blaine asked. She jerked her head away. The braid slipped from his hand. Camille stifled a laugh into her sleeve. What happens when the last wall a woman has built around herself is touched without permission? She did not speak. She did not move. She gripped the cart handle harder. Her chin lifted just an inch. Blaine saw it. He smiled. He walked back to the piano. Travis was already opening his wallet. "All right," Travis said. He pulled out a $100 bill. He smoothed it. He set it on the piano lid. $100 says she can't hit 5 clean notes in a row. Any of you in?" "I'll match it," Weston said. "Easy money." Camille tilted her head. "I'll go $200. Look at her hands. Those hands have probably held mop handles since she was 12. Blaine opened the Chopin etude that had been resting on the stand. He held it up so the room could see it. He turned it around for her, slow, like a teacher with a flashcard. Bet she thinks Chopin is a brand of shampoo. He folded the sheet in half, then again, until it became a paper airplane. He aimed it. He let it go. It landed an inch from her left boot. His voice came back cold. He did not raise it. He did not need to. The smile had gone. What replaced it was older, harder, and not entirely his own. "Play a song, or are your fingers only trained for mop handles? 5 clean notes win you the $100, miss, and you mop my dorm floor till graduation." The hall went quiet. 2 students at the back had stopped laughing. One had pulled out a phone. Amara Whitfield did not look down at the paper airplane. She looked at the piano. Amara looked at the paper airplane on the floor. Then she bent down and picked it up. The students did not stop her. They thought it was the start of the joke. She unfolded it slowly, smoothed the creases against her thigh. She knew the page before her eyes had finished reading it. Chopin Opus 25, number 11, Winter Wind. She had not played the piece in 13 years. She remembered it the way some people remember a smell from childhood, whole, intact, without permission. Behind it, behind the printed staff lines on the cheap conservatory paper, was the kitchen in the Roxbury apartment, the radio off, her mother in the chair by the window in the blue housecoat with the lace at the cuffs, hands already starting to curl. It was the ballad her mother had asked for, not this etude, but Chopin was Chopin. The room inside her memory did not care which piece had opened the door. "The music doesn't care who's listening, baby." That was what her mother had said. She'd been 16. She had not known what the sentence meant. She thought now that she did. If she walked away tonight, if she put the etude back on the cart and finished her shift, if she clocked out when the night shift ended, took the long subway ride home to Maribel, and let this moment go, what would she be? She knew the answer. She had been that answer for 13 years. A woman who had agreed, quietly, every shift, every past photograph, every knotted mop, every email to a music school that did not write back. She had been very polite about it. The polite years were over. What does a woman owe herself the night the last wall comes down? She did not say it out loud. She said it inside her ribs where it had been waiting since she was 18. She turned. She walked toward the Steinway. She did not look at Blaine. She looked at the bench where his cashmere overcoat was draped across the keyboard cover. "Move your coat off the bench," she said. The room went quiet in a way it had not been a moment before. Blaine blinked. He had not expected her to speak. He had not expected her to walk forward at all. He had been ready for tears, for a long walk back to the door, for the satisfaction of watching a black woman leave a room he had decided she did not belong in. He had not been ready for this. Travis set his phone down on the piano lid. Camille lowered hers. Weston did not move. Blaine looked at the bench, then at her, then he moved the coat. She did not rush. That was the first thing the room noticed. She took off her plastic gloves one finger at a time, the way her mother used to take off her wedding ring at the kitchen sink. She placed them on the cart beside the spray bottle and the crumpled $5 bill she had never touched. Then she walked forward with the dignity she had spent 13 years hiding. She did not look at Blaine. She walked to the bench. The graduate student in the third row leaned forward. Her body had decided before she had. The Steinway sat under a single house light, its lid open like a wing. The conservatory's oldest concert grand. The hall around it had been built for this piano. Polished oak and red velvet surrounded acoustics that musicians traveled to study. The keys had been touched by every great pianist that had passed through Wexford in the last century. Amara Whitfield knew it better than any of them. She sat down, not heavily, not gently, the way a person sits in a chair that has been waiting for them. She adjusted the bench half an inch back. She did not look down. Her body had not forgotten the half inch. She pressed the sustain pedal once. She pressed the middle pedal twice because it had a slight catch, a flaw she seemed to be the only person in Wexford who had truly learned. She placed her left hand on the keyboard first, then the right. Her fingers hovered just above the ivory keys. Blaine stood 3 feet behind her, arms crossed. The smile on his face was no longer a smile. He did not know that yet. She closed her eyes. Her mother was very close. She breathed in. She did not breathe out. The room did not breathe either. She opened her eyes. Her hands came down, not on Winter Wind. The first chord arrived in G minor, largo and pianissimo. It did not arrive so much as appear, the way fog appears in a valley before you notice it has come in. 3 notes sustained together. The Steinway opened its voice as though it had been waiting for someone to touch it with love. Pianists traveled from across the country to study the acoustics of Alden Hall. For one chord, the hall held the sound. For another chord, it gave the sound back. For a third chord, the room was no longer a room. It was a body, and the body knew. Somewhere underneath its old wood and red velvet, the body had been waiting for this exact pressure of fingers for a very long time. Behind her, Blaine's smile faltered. A muscle moved in his jaw he could not control. He did not feel it move. Nobody else saw it. The graduate student in the third row, who had been leaning forward, leaned forward another inch. Travis's grin began to slip. He had no music training. Not really. He was a theory major because his father had wanted him at a conservatory, but he had been raised on his mother's classical records. He knew in some part of his ribcage that the woman at the piano was not bluffing. Camille was still recording. Her wrist had stopped moving with the music. The phone was simply held. In the third row, the graduate student opened her mouth to say something. She closed it again. She did not yet have the right sentence. Amara Whitfield, in a Navy janitor's uniform, had played 3 chords of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. She had not yet begun. What does it look like, do you think, when a room realizes it has been wrong about a person? It does not happen all at once. Travis broke first. It happened in the 8th bar. He did not consciously decide to stop laughing. He simply realized, in the middle of a chuckle, that the chuckle did not belong in the room anymore. He closed his mouth. He closed it carefully, as if it might be expensive. He looked at the piano. He looked at Blaine. Blaine did not look back. Weston broke next. Weston had been filming from the side casually, the way a man films something he expects to be funny. By the 12th bar, his arm had lowered. The phone was still on. It was pointed at the floor now. His expression still thought the joke was happening. His arm knew better. Camille broke last. She had been recording, preparing a caption, and waiting for another joke. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Her face went through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion, then recognition, then something more complicated, the kind of thing 22-year-olds do not yet have a vocabulary for. It was the expression of a person seeing for the first time that the joke is on her. She lowered her phone. She did not turn it off. She had not yet decided whether to keep what was on it. In the third row, the graduate student leaned toward her seatmate. "Is that the ballad?" The student whispered the question. "The first one?" Her seatmate did not answer. He was a senior in piano performance. He had attempted the ballad in his junior recital. He had stopped midway through the development section and walked off the stage. He nodded. 2 more rows back, the young woman with the violin case at her feet lifted her face. Her cheeks were wet. By the time Amara reached the development section, the music in the room had ceased to be music. It had become weather. Her right hand had moved into the first major run, cascading scales, 16th notes, the kind of passage that separates the pianists who can finish the ballad from the pianists who only own a recording of it. Each note arrived with weight. Each note arrived at precisely the moment it needed to. The Steinway responded the way the Steinway only responds for hands it knows. Her left hand thundered, but loudness was not the point. The left hand carried the storm underneath the melody, the way a heart carries the blood under a face, the way an ocean carries a ship, while the ship believes it is moving on its own. Her body did not move. This was the strangest thing in the room. Her hands were doing impossible work. Her forearms were a blur, but her shoulders were still. Her face was almost calm. The only motion above her elbows was a small, even breath she let out at the end of every 4th measure. The door at the back of the hall opened. A tall man with white hair and a charcoal overcoat stepped into the rear aisle. He had been on his way to his office on the floor above. He had heard something through the ceiling, and he had turned around. Maestro Silas Beaumont did not sit. He stood at the back, hands at his sides, very still. He did not know who was at the piano. He could not see her face from where he stood. He did not need to see her face. He knew the playing. He had not heard it in 13 years. Blaine, 3 feet from the bench, had finally begun to understand what was happening in his hall. His arms uncrossed, his mouth opened a 1/4 inch. He did not close it. Chopin's first ballade has a moment near its end that pianists call the pause. It is not silence in the traditional sense. It is the held breath before the storm. Chopin marks it pianissimo and writes a fermata over the last whisper of melody. The pianist holds the room for a beat that lasts as long as the pianist decides it lasts. Most pianists hold that breath briefly. The brave allow it to linger. Amara held it longer than anyone in the room expected. Her hands lifted from the keys. Not all the way. Only an inch, maybe 2. Enough that you could see her wrists in the worklight above the bench. Enough that you could see, if you knew where to look, that her hands were not shaking. The hall did not breathe. Blaine did not breathe. Maestro Beaumont at the back closed his eyes. He knew what was about to happen. He had not heard it for 13 years. He knew, the way a farmer knows weather, that he was about to hear it now. Travis's hand had gone to his throat without him being aware of it. Weston was staring at his shoes. Camille's phone, still pointed at the floor, was still recording, though she had forgotten about it. The graduate student in the 3rd row had her hand pressed against her mouth, pressed hard, the way you press against a mouth that wants to make a sound it should not make in a recital hall. The young woman with the violin case was crying without sound. What do you think, when you can feel a room about to break? Amara Whitfield had practiced this exact silence alone in this hall, long after midnight on quiet nights for almost 3 years. She had practiced not flinching when it asked her to hold one more heartbeat. Tonight, in a half-lit Alden hall, she held it. She held it. She held it. She brought her hands back down. The coda exploded. Presto con fuoco, fast and full of fire. The most violent ending Chopin ever wrote for the piano. A sequence of octave runs in opposing directions, chromatic descent in both hands, cross rhythms that fight each other across the keyboard, notes flung at the audience, the way an angry sky flings rain at glass, not to be heard, but to be survived. Amara's hands no longer belonged to her. They belonged to the piano. They belonged to Lenora Whitfield, who had taught her this passage one summer when she was 15 in a kitchen that no longer existed, on a piano that had been in storage in Dorchester for 11 years without anyone knowing it. They belonged to the woman in the blue housecoat with the lace at the cuffs. They belonged to the 13 years of silence that had been waiting all this time inside one black woman's ribs. The Steinway responded. It thundered. The wood resonated with a depth that came up through the floor and into the soles of the feet of every listener. Two of them began to cry without knowing they were crying. Camille dropped her phone. It hit the carpet with a soft thud. Nobody noticed. Blaine took a step back from the bench. He did not know he had taken it. His arms hung at his sides. His mouth was still open. The final phrase of the ballad rose, a chromatic surge that climbs the keyboard like a body climbing out of water. Amara's right hand went up and up and up. She struck the two final chords fortissimo. The first was thunder. The second was an answer. And then the last note. A single low G in the deepest bass pressed and held. It rang the way distant weather rings in a window. Long, long, long. Her hands lifted off the keys. She did not look up. She set her hands gently in her lap. The piano was still singing. The silence held. Several seconds passed. Nobody in the hall understood what they had just heard. The last note of the ballad rang in the rafters of Alden Hall, like a bell that did not know how to stop. Eventually, Travis set his $100 bill back on the seat beside him. His hand was shaking. He did not look at the money. He did not look at anyone. He stared at the piano lid the way a man stares at something he has just lost a great deal of. Then Blaine opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it. Camille reached up and quietly turned off her phone. She did not turn it off because she was ashamed. She turned it off because she did not deserve to keep what was on it. A cello student on the balcony, a freshman whose name nobody in the room knew, began to cry without sound. The kind of crying you do when something true has happened in a building that does not usually permit truth. Weston sat down. He did not pick a chair. He sat where he was standing. He did not say a word. The silence was the climax, not the applause that would come later, not the standing ovation. The silence itself became the climax in the conservatory. Nobody could find a sound large enough to put on top of what had just been played. Not the donor's son, not the soprano, not the dean of piano. What do you say, do you think, when a room you have walked through for 40 years has finally said something back to you? Maestro Silas Beaumont walked very slowly down the center aisle of Alden Hall. His charcoal coat was still buttoned. His hands hung at his sides. He did not hurry. He stopped 3 feet from the edge of the stage. He looked at the woman at the piano. "Miss Whitfield," he said quietly. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "I think we owe you a stage." The applause did not start with Beaumont. The applause started with the young woman with the violin case at her feet. She stood. Then her friend stood. Then the graduate student in the 3rd row stood. Then a senior in piano performance, the one who had attempted the ballad and not finished it, stood. Then everyone stood. The applause that filled Alden Hall in the minutes that followed was not the applause of a polite audience. It was the applause of a building that had been waiting 13 years to be told what it had let walk out of its front door. It was loud, and it was strange, and it did not stop when it should have stopped. Amara did not turn to receive it. She closed the keyboard cover. She did it the way she did everything else, without hurry. Beaumont turned to Blaine. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room had gone quiet again the second the dean's mouth had opened. "Mr. Prescott," he said, "the woman you dismissed as the help has just played a ballad you have not yet earned the right to attempt." Blaine's face was white. Amara stood from the bench. She straightened her uniform. She walked to her cart. She picked up the Chopin etude, the one Blaine had folded into a paper airplane, the one she had unfolded against her thigh before she sat down at the bench. She smoothed it once more. She placed it carefully on top of the piano lid beside Travis's $100 bill, the way a teacher might leave a returned assignment. Then she turned, for the first time all evening, and looked Blaine Prescott directly in the face. "The piano remembered me," she said. "You just didn't bother to ask who I was." She walked off the stage. She picked up the handle of her cart. She rolled it back out through the side door, the way she had rolled it in. The note from the Steinway was still ringing in someone's ear, somewhere in the back of the hall. Amara finished her shift when the night shift ended, the way she had finished it on quiet nights for almost 3 years. She did not look back at Alden Hall. She reached home to the Dorchester apartment before the city had fully awakened. After a few hours of sleep, she brought home a sweet bun from the bakery on Bowden Street, Maribel's favorite kind, cardamom with sugar on top. She set it on the kitchen table. She started to tell her aunt what had happened. She did not get past the first sentence. Maribel put down her tea. She did not say anything. She stood with her walker, crossed the kitchen, and stopped at the bottom cupboard by the refrigerator, the one Amara had never opened. She pulled out a small wooden box. She set it on the table. She slid it across the wood toward her niece. The box was dusty. The hinges creaked when Amara opened it. Inside were receipts. Amara picked the top one up. The first receipt was for a piano tuning at a storage facility in Dorchester, $65. The next receipt came from the following season, and another from the season after that. She thumbed through the stack with hands that had started again to shake. There were 22 receipts covering 11 years, with a tuning scheduled every 6 months without exception. Every receipt had Maribel's signature at the bottom. "Your mom's upright is still in storage," Maribel said. "I've kept it tuned for 11 years. She folded her hands in her lap. "I knew you weren't done." Amara's throat did not work for a moment. "How did you afford this?" Amara finally asked. Maribel did not answer that question. She nodded at the sweet bun. "Eat your pastry, child. It's getting cold." While Amara sat in the kitchen, 3 students climbed the stairs to Maestro Beaumont's office. The first was the young woman with the violin case. Her name was Renee. She had not slept. She had spent the night writing a letter. The second was the senior in piano performance who had attempted the ballade and not finished it. His name was Adrian. He had brought a printed copy of the student conduct code. The third was a flute student who had been sitting 2 seats over from Renee. She had been thinking since the middle of the night about her own mother, a hotel maid in Lynn. The 3 of them did not know each other well. They had met for coffee early that morning, written the letter together, and signed it. The letter was 3 pages. It named Blaine Prescott, Travis Langley, Weston Clark, and Camille Pembroke. It described the previous night and requested formal disciplinary review. The letter reached Beaumont's desk that morning. Beaumont read it once. He read it twice. Then he picked up his telephone. The man who answered the phone in Beacon Hill that morning was Sterling Prescott. Beaumont did not ask for anything. He did not threaten. He told Sterling, in the way that an old man tells another old man bad news, that Wexford's disciplinary committee would be meeting that afternoon, that the meeting concerned Sterling's son, that if Blaine was not seen by the committee to receive the consequences his behavior had earned, Beaumont would personally recommend that the conservatory's East Wing be renamed. Sterling did not speak for some time. When he did, his voice sounded like a closed door from the other side. "I will handle my son." He did. Sterling cut Blaine's tuition allowance for the remainder of the semester. He cut his expense account. He sold the paycheck that had been a graduation gift, though Blaine did not own it yet, in front of his son on the kitchen table where the Van Cliburn note had also lived. He did not raise his voice. The Conservatory Disciplinary Committee suspended Blaine Prescott for 1 full semester. His senior recital was postponed indefinitely. Travis, Weston, and Camille were placed on academic probation. Later, Maestro Beaumont knocked on the door of an apartment in Dorchester. He had a folder under his arm. Maribel offered him tea. He sat at the kitchen table where the wooden box of receipts still rested. He opened his folder. The conservatory had voted that afternoon, by unanimous decision, to restore Amara Whitfield's full scholarship, to offer her the senior recital slot Blaine had vacated, to extend a performance contract with the Boston Chamber Society. He set the papers on the table. He did not ask her if she would accept. He simply waited. Amara looked at her aunt. Maribel looked at her niece. "Eat your pastry, child," Maribel said again, "or it really will get cold." Weeks later, on a winter evening, Alden Hall was full, every seat sold, standing room only at the back. Amara Whitfield walked onto the stage in a simple black gown. Her hair was loose. She did not carry sheet music. In the front row, in a wheelchair, sat a 68-year-old woman in her Sunday coat, hands folded in her lap, eyes shining. Amara sat down at the Steinway. She did not test the pedal twice. Tonight, the room knew her. She opened with the ballad. This time she had chosen it. The note from the Steinway had stopped ringing somewhere in the second week. By the time winter settled over Boston, Amara Whitfield had given her custodial uniform back to Wexford's facilities office. She handed it across the counter, washed, folded, and pressed. The woman behind the desk had been working at Wexford for 31 years. She accepted the uniform with both hands, the way she had once accepted her own diploma. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Welcome back." Amara graduated from Wexford the following spring. Maribel was in the front row in her Sunday coat. The conservatory took a new photograph of her at 29 in the same hallway where her 15-year-old face still hung. They hung the new picture beside the old one. They did not take the old one down. She did not become famous. She did not need to. She took the Boston Chamber Society contract. She took a weekend teaching position at a community music school in Roxbury, the same neighborhood where her mother had once taught piano lessons for $30 an hour. She charged less than her mother had. She kept the Dorchester apartment. Maribel continued living there with her. Talent does not disappear when the world stops watching it. It may become quiet. It may be buried beneath bills, caregiving, grief, uniforms, long commutes, and the practical work of surviving. But quiet is not the same as gone. Amara did not stop being a pianist when she left the conservatory. She stopped having the freedom to live like one. Life demanded that she care for her mother, earn money, finish school, and later support the aunt who had supported her. None of those choices made her less gifted. They revealed another kind of strength, the kind that rarely earns applause because it happens in kitchens, hospitals, late-night trains, and rooms where no one is watching. Her return to the piano was not a sudden miracle. It was the result of all the invisible nights that came before it. Every time she cleaned the Steinway with care, every time she sat alone beneath the work light, every time her shaking hands settled after the first few measures, she was keeping a small promise to herself. She did not know whether anyone would ever hear her again. She played anyway. Maribel's receipts carried a similar lesson. She could not force Amara to return to music. She could not remove the grief or give back the years they had lost. What she could do was protect a possibility. Twice each year, she quietly paid to keep Lenora's piano alive. She preserved something her niece was not ready to touch, because love sometimes means caring for another person's hope until they are strong enough to hold it again. Maestro Beaumont also had a choice. He could have treated Amara's performance as an entertaining surprise and allowed the institution to return to normal. Instead, he recognized that the conservatory had failed her. He used his position to open the door that should never have been closed. His response did not erase the years of silence, but it showed that responsibility begins when people with authority stop protecting comfort and start repairing harm. The students in the hall faced their own choices. Some laughed, some recorded, some lowered their eyes. The young violinist did not defend Amara in the moment, and she had to live with that truth. Yet regret did not become the end of her story. She returned with other students, wrote down what happened, and accepted the responsibility of becoming a witness. That does not make her earlier silence harmless. It means she allowed shame to become action instead of an excuse. A second chance is not permission to pretend we did nothing wrong. It is an opportunity to choose differently when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Blaine's humiliation did not begin when Amara played. It began with every small choice that brought him to that moment. He chose to speak with cruelty. He chose to use his family name as protection. He chose to touch another person's hair without permission. He chose to turn a sheet of music into a weapon of embarrassment because he believed the uniform in front of him told him everything worth knowing. His talent at the piano could not protect him from the consequences of those choices. Skill without humility becomes empty. Education without kindness becomes another way to make people feel small. A beautiful performance cannot hide an ugly character forever. Even so, accountability should not be confused with revenge. Blaine was suspended. His privileges were reduced. His recital was taken away because his actions had made him unworthy of that stage at that time. Those consequences were not meant to destroy his future. They were meant to require him to face what he had done. Whether he grew from that lesson would depend on the choices he made afterward. Forgiveness can leave room for change, but it does not require the person who was harmed to forget, excuse, or welcome the offender back before trust has been earned. Dignity is not something a uniform can take from a person. A mop does not erase education. A name tag does not measure talent. A service job does not place one human being beneath another. The person cleaning a room may understand the room better than anyone performing inside it. The woman pushing the cart may be carrying a history, a responsibility, and a gift no one has bothered to ask about. The story you have heard is fictional, but the dismissals behind it are real. People are spoken past in classrooms, office corridors, hotel lobbies, restaurants, hospitals, and concert halls every day. Hands are placed on bodies and hair without permission. Money is thrown instead of offered with respect. Jokes are made because a room full of people decides laughter is safer than courage. The important question is not whether these moments happen. The important question is what we do when we are present for one. You may never be asked to give a speech or confront a powerful person in front of a crowd. Courage is often much quieter. It can mean refusing to laugh. It can mean putting the phone down and telling a friend to stop. It can mean asking a worker's name, reporting what you witnessed, or standing beside someone so they do not have to face humiliation alone. Kindness does not always arrive as a grand gesture. Sometimes it is a security guard who hears a hidden performance and chooses not to expose it. Sometimes it is an aunt protecting a piano in storage. Sometimes it is a teacher saying, "We owe you a stage." Sometimes it is a room finally standing for the person it spent years refusing to see. Amara's story also asks us to look inward. Most of us would like to imagine ourselves as the person at the piano or the first person to stand. But there may have been moments when we looked at the floor. There may have been times when we laughed because everyone else laughed, stayed silent because speaking felt uncomfortable, or assumed we understood someone because of the clothes they wore and the work they performed. Honesty about those moments is not meant to make us hopeless. It gives us a place to begin. We cannot change an old choice, but we can decide what kind of person will make the next one. And perhaps you recognize another part of Amara's life. Maybe you once loved something deeply and had to set it aside. Perhaps work, illness, family duties, money, loss, or fear placed years between you and the person you thought you would become. Do not confuse delay with failure. The dream may return in a different form. The stage may be smaller. The audience may be different. You may not become famous, and fame was never the measure of whether the gift mattered. Amara's life became meaningful, not because the whole world learned her name, but because she returned to the music, cared for the people she loved, and later placed her knowledge into the hands of children from the neighborhood where her own story began. That is a life of real success. Your gift does not disappear simply because life forced you to set it down. The dream, the talent, and the part of yourself you once walked away from may still be waiting inside you. It may feel frightened. It may be out of practice. Your hands may shake through the first few measures. Let them shake. Begin anyway. Pick up the brush, the pen, the instrument, the book, or the idea you once believed belonged to you. Give yourself the patience you would offer someone you love. You do not have to recover every lost year in one night. You only have to take one honest step toward the thing that still makes you feel alive. The world does not get to decide that your best work is over. It does not get to bury what you were born to do simply because it failed to recognize you the first time. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember what is still inside them. Subscribe to Voices Unforgotten, where we tell stories about people the world tried to dismiss and the moments they chose to stand again, and leave an honest thought in the comments. Have you ever been the quiet person in the room, holding the cart, wearing the uniform, and waiting for someone to ask who you were? Or have you ever been the person who looked away, laughed, or judged too quickly? Whatever your answer is, let it guide your next choice. Another story will be waiting for you soon.